So how do you actually write a research design for a research paper? So what I'm going to do is give you some tips in this video in terms of thinking about research designs. So if you don't know me, I'm an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out that I want to pay the favor forward and help you out as much as I possibly can. Okay, in terms of research design, it's a little kind of a trickier thing. So this is going to be more directed towards graduate students, I think, but undergraduate students are probably going to get something out of this. But if you are a master's student or a PhD student, you're probably going to get a little bit more out of this in terms of what you're going to do. But, you know, if you're an undergraduate or high school student, by all means, you should watch this as well. It's going to help you out. So in terms of thinking about research designs for a research paper, what you have to be thinking about is, the first thing is trying to figure out what are you actually trying to accomplish. I think sort of thinking about what you want to do and what do you want to study is going to allow you to understand what a research design is and get you thinking about how to actually develop this research design so people are going to pay attention to it and think about it. So the best advice that I have read, and I'm blanking, it's a couple of economists at MIT. You folks have probably have some of you might have read it. You might want to put it in there. I think it's all about quasi-experimental design. And is it Pichet? I can't remember how to say the name. Agris and Pichet. But what you want to think about is, create a ideal situation and think about what that ideal situation or ideal test would be and try to work backwards in terms of trying to solve getting to that ideal situation, right? So that's a great thing to think about in terms of coming up with research design. I think it really helps me think about my own research designs and think about, what I am going to do going forward. So really start at that ideal situation and just work your way back in terms of what you can get to and how you're actually going to get there. What would it actually look like to create a study that was perfectly done and, perfectly implemented? What would you actually do to actually accomplish that particular thing? And then what you do is you start working back in terms of thinking about the assumptions that you have to make and getting around what those assumptions are. That's kind of where you start thinking about the research design, where you are really taking a deep dive in terms of, well, I can't do that, but I can do this. And this might be a better way to do it in terms of what you are doing. That's a great way to think about it. The other thing that you should be thinking about in terms of when you're writing this up is, an important aspect of a research design, which a lot of people seem to forget, is that the context, the setting, the thing that you're actually, the phenomenon, the sort of thing where the phenomenon is situated, the arena where this phenomenon is situated, has to be talked about. It has to sort of set up what is going on with the research design, why you're actually looking at that particular setting, why it's an important thing for you to explore this phenomenon, this thing within that ideal setting. Why is it that you're testing in this area, right? So if you're testing and exploring, maybe you're exploring gossip, or maybe you're trying to figure out how people interact with other people in an organization, but then you go and study it within, roughnecks in an oil rig. Well, why should you study it there? Why is that an ideal situation? Why is that an interesting sort of aspect to understand how gossip situates or gossip actually works? That's an important thing to think about in terms of what you are going to do and how you're going to understand your ideal setting, your ideal experimental setup, and why you're actually going there. So that's an important thing to think about that is going to... So the world is not context-free, right? So everything that we do and every experiment that we do has a context behind it. And so you have to think about, why does this context actually matter? And I wish it was the case where it wasn't, but even in the physical sciences, even in the natural sciences, that context matters. If you are going to do an experiment on ideal gases, doing that experiment in minus 70 below weather is going to behave a little bit differently than if you were in a very muggy situation, like in, if you were in the Amazon rainforest and you're looking at ideal gases there. It's probably going to be a little bit different unless you can control for those things. But, it's hard to control for those things. So you have to sort of think about that particular setting in terms of what actually means what you're doing. The other thing that you have to sort of explore is thinking about the data itself, right? So what is the population that you're trying to generalize to? What are you trying to get at? And then what is that sample that you're looking at? How does that not only represent the population, but what does it actually look like? What is going on there, right? So you have to think about, that population and sample and really take a deep dive into what it is sort of communicating, or why you're actually looking at that and why that's sort of important for this setting. Then often what you'll see in most research papers is that they will take some sort of deep dive into the dependent, independent, and control variables. The variables of interest, basically, is what, and some people call it variables of interest. They call it, criterion. In predictor variables, there's different various names depending on what your style is, I guess, and how, what your philosophy of science is, basically, in terms of how you think the world works. And, what we're looking at there is thinking about, what is changing and what is that actually impacting, right? So that's the independent variable, is what is changing or what are you manipulating, and what is it actually impacting with the dependent variable. And then, thinking about what are the control situations and control variables and all these sort of different ways to control for, the air quality in the Amazon, for example, compared to being in minus 70 degree weather. Looking at those different control variables is important in terms of coming up with a more valid study. I have a video from a long time ago in terms of thinking about validity. And you should look at a series of videos. Actually, you should look at those because it's important to think about these things. But what you're trying to look at is, how are you actually putting this all together, and what are you actually trying to study and look at? Now, it's going to vary a lot, so I don't want to take deep dives into the variables, but it's going to vary a lot depending on the method that you're looking at. So experimental stuff is set up a little differently than, archival stuff, and it's set up differently than qualitative research. But you're really kind of explaining how those variables are representing what you're actually trying to study. And that data that you're looking at is actually representing what you're trying to study. That's an important thing to think about. Then after you do that, and you talk about the data, often what you'll do is get into the analytical technique. How are you actually going to analyze this data? What does it actually look like to analyze it? And then, it could go either way in terms of where you put this and write this up, but you could put the actual research design that you actually have before that, and where you are going to talk about, is this an experiment? Are you doing a randomized controlled trial? Are you analyzing archival data? If so, what kind of regression techniques are you using to do that? How are you gathering this data, putting it all together? You're going to want to think about talking about this research design, the actual specific research design that you're going to choose, and what that's going to look like to communicate what you're trying to do, coming back to this ultimate goal that you want to accomplish, right? So that's the important thing to think about, is what are you actually trying to accomplish with this research paper? And once you figure that out, working backwards in terms of explaining what the research design looks like, it becomes a lot more easier. And so most people are going to struggle, most graduate students, most professors, me, are going to struggle trying to figure out what the heck are we actually going to try to do here. So that's 80% of the problem, is figuring out what the heck the problem is. And once you figure that out, all this other stuff makes a lot more sense and becomes a lot more easier. So you're going to flounder and you're going to go through different cycles of this. So what I would recommend for you to do is just do a quick dump, a quick sort of write down of, what is the setting that you're actually going to look at, what is the research design that you're actually going to choose to do in terms of getting this ideal situation. What are the sort of limitations and assumptions that you have to make to get there, and then getting into what is the variables that you're going to look at, independent, dependent, independent, and control variables. And then, thinking about what is the analytical technique, if you could do a quick dump of that, and then just constantly iterate as you go, and thinking about how to actually improve this. So you want to do a quick, here it is. And then after, you want to get some feedback on that in terms of what you're going to study and what you're going to do with that research design, and keep doing that several times until you come up with something that's a little bit more rigorous and a little bit more what the sort of state of the art is. I think that's going to be very helpful for you in terms of thinking about the research designs for your research paper. So hopefully this helps you out in terms of thinking about various research designs and really taking a deep dive. I didn't actually get into specific research designs because I think it's very unique and it's very much, you can take many courses on each one of these things. I'm not going to get into it in this video. There's too much to go into, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview in terms of how you actually want to write this up and think about what you're going to do in terms of writing this up. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, do subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I do appreciate it. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.